The world-famous Solовецкий monastery looks as though it might have risen from the very depths of the White Sea. Alexander Solzhenitsyn described this very place in his famous novel, The Gulag Archipelago. At the dawn of the Soviet era, this monastery was turned into the first labor camp. Today, monks have again returned to the monastery. They conduct services and ring new sets of bells. The originals disappeared under mysterious circumstances.
I need to take a break and then I can go again.
In the 1920s, the Soviet Union set about eliminating all remnants of Russia's past. Churches were demolished and their relics desecrated. Jewels were extracted from objects of worship and sorted into different categories. Bells were removed to be melted down. The bells of Solовецкий monastery also faced the same fate. They were loaded onto a barge to be transported to the mainland. The vessel left harbor, but never reached its destination. The barge simply vanished. Sergei Golubев has been spending his vacations here for more than 10 years, ever since he first heard about the lost bells. In the past decade, he learned all there is to know about the bells. The first search party was organized as early as the 1970s. The expedition, launched by a students' diving club, was based on the recollections of local residents.
The information they collected was either insufficient or distorted, because people who might have known what happened to the bells had already died by that time. There was simply no one left. Even the ship's logs had been lost.
Records from that era are extremely confused. For example, the first convicts arrived at the Solовецкий monastery at the beginning of June 1923. But documents about that only appeared in October of that year. It's not even known who exactly was the warden of the labor camp in the 1930s. Neither is it clear what date the barge set off with the bells. 158 kilometers from the Arctic Circle, the White Sea is dotted with islands. In summer, the banks are covered with berries, and the sun hardly ever sets. The numerous lakes teem with fish, and forests abound with hares and grouse. For many centuries, man never set foot on these islands. The archipelago is hard to reach even with the help of aircraft. Hundreds of years ago, it was completely out of reach. Typical of the north, the weather here is also changeable and prone to long-lasting storms. Currents are strong, and in winter, the Solовецкие Islands are completely inaccessible. Although the sea is iced over, it doesn't freeze completely, meaning no one can cross by foot or by boat. Monks began to settle here in the early 1400s, and for the next centuries the monastery thrived. More and more bells were added, and it's said that at one point there were up to 50. Now, only 2 remain.
Decorations on the bells and patterns are usually very small because larger ones distort the sound. But this bell combines a wonderful pattern with an exceptional tone. However, it must have been out of tune with other bells, so it was brought down and kept separately. That's how it survived.
None of the bells exhibited in this museum originate from the Solовецкий monastery.
There are very few bells in Russia that date back to the 18th or 19th century because recasting them was a common thing. As soon as the slightest crack appeared, the bell was sent off to be remelted. That is why all the bells, especially those of the 18th to 19th centuries, are considered extremely valuable.
Victor! Come on, we're waiting for you.
Sergei is convinced he knows where to find the bells. There are a number of points on the bottom of the White Sea that have caught his attention. He's planned a route for his sonar-equipped boat. The divers will have to examine every inch of the seabed. This point, known as Point A, has aroused significant interest from the search party.
We've gathered significant data, and there are not that many places where this barge could have ended up. That's why we're interested in this area in particular.
Sergei's camping out on one of the islands halfway between Solовецкий monastery and the nearest port of Kem, which he is sure is where the barge was headed. The port is only 60 kilometers away, and the divers have several theories as to what happened to the barge. According to one version, a tugboat was pulling the barge, laden with the bells, when a storm rolled in. The weather at the White Sea is changeable. The captain of the tugboat cut the tow line, and the barge went underwater. This is Point A, the location the divers have placed their bets on.
Something interesting lies there, something that resembles a barge.
A second theory suggests the boat was making its way through fog and hit a submerged rock. The most likely candidate for that in this ridge is called Saltychikha.
The ridge is about 1 meter deep and is thus very dangerous. We're floating over some rocks. The old shipping routes went around both sides of it. In the fog, the barge could have easily run into this rock because there was no sonar then. Our device is telling us that something like a long ship or a boat of some sort is down there at a depth of 15 meters.
The final theory is that the barge was deliberately scuttled to hide the bells until times changed. If that was the case, Sergei believes that this island, Pesyaluda, would have been the perfect choice. Strong waves never reach it, and in addition, Pesyaluda is mentioned in the recollections gathered by Sergei's predecessors in the 1970s. The question is, could the bells have really been hidden, despite orders from the Soviet government?
It's hard to say because boats were staffed by former novices and monastery workers. Who knows what they were capable of?
The monastery had secret plans about how to hide its treasures. It's known that that happened at least once during the Crimean War. In the 1920s, the monks had plenty of time before the Bolsheviks finally reached the Solовецкие Islands.
They concealed some things. For example, there was a hiding place in Nikolsky Cathedral in case of attacks. Monastery relics were indeed discovered in 1921 and 1922, soon after the Bolsheviks had taken power. Labor camp staff were actively engaged in treasure hunting because of numerous rumors about hidden riches. For example, someone noticed a small window into some room, which apparently had no entrance. They started banging the walls and didn't discover treasure, but did find 2 bundles that turned out to contain the leather shoes of Saint Zosima and the relics of Saint Savati. The monks considered them sacred and tried to hide them.
The monks had their own opinions about what was valuable, just as Sergei does now.
If we actually find these bells, our aim isn't to hang them back up and make them ring again. The important thing is that they are a part of our history. For our country, for Russia, they are priceless. They are a memory of the past.
The divers have arrived at the expedition camp. Their bulky equipment takes up the entire beach. This robot can examine the seabed and send signals back to the surface. For the divers, it's used as a last resort, because the search is underwater and the robot needs a source of energy, an electric generator. The divers have decided that if they do find the bells, they'll put all their equipment on a separate boat. That'll help the teams who will raise the bells from the bottom of the sea. It seems as though the divers appear thoroughly prepared for the trip. But then, events take an unexpected turn. First, the underwater explorers focus on point A, as this is the most interesting sight of all. Sonar imagery reveals something very similar to a sunken barge. It's highly possible that the lost Solовецкие monastery bells are submerged here. To examine the seabed, they need to mark the area with buoys. It's crucial that the exact position is fixed early on.
Andrei, on my command, throw the buoy out. Throw it!
The current here is very strong and quickly carries the boat away. If it's so difficult to simply mark the area, the dive itself will be much worse.
You won't reach the bottom here. The current will drag you away. Maybe we should move to the second point until the current gets weaker.
No, now that we're here, let's dive.
Okay, go right between the buoys. Drop anchor so that the boat stops between them.
Suddenly, some way from the marked area, one diver decides to jump in without telling anyone.
Is he tethered?
No.
He's not even using a rope.
In no time, he was carried several meters by the strong current.
Grab the rope. Should I pull you out? How could you have left without tethering yourself?
Just as the boat pulled the diver to safety, another dived in without a security rope.
You should never do that. It's a sea, not some lake. You can't dive like that. You should be tied to each other.
The support group tries to act as though nothing has happened. But in truth, everyone in the boats is worried, because the currents here could drag a man far out to sea. A marker buoy for the search location is at last in sight.
Where's the other one? Have you seen him?
No. Has he gone down?
Yeah, he has. The idiot.
Soon the second diver also breaks the surface.
I found one of the buoys, but there's nothing there.
You didn't reach the site. You dropped anchor too early. You had to stop between the buoys.
I went down along the rope, under one of the buoys.
You should have moved further and dropped anchor between the buoys.
Anyway, is the current always this strong?
The guys missed the line that we marked with buoys by 30 meters at least. The chances that they actually examined the place we needed to check are very slim.
Sergei decides to move to the second point, Pesyaluda Island. There are neither currents nor large waves, and Sergei believes that if someone really wanted to hide the bells by sinking the barge, this would have suited them perfectly. Few imagined then that the Soviet Union could ever last so long.
The sonar showed scattered dots, which created an impression as though a ship had turned upside down and something had spilled out. The dots were so dense, and they were in the middle of nowhere.
This place is secluded and easy to find. Sergei's chosen it because it's safe to dive here. The divers can simply walk into the sea from the shore.
How far is it from the shore?
Well, quite far, about 100 meters.
Then we'll need another go.
The old shipping route of the 1920s and 30s is very different from the modern one. When the weather's foul, on their way to the port of Kem, ships will still hide from the waves and winds behind the neighboring islands. That's what the climate is like in the northern seas. Weather can change quickly and catch sailors unawares, as well as anybody else who doesn't take the White Sea seriously enough. During their submersion near the rocky Saltichicha Ridge, the divers lost any enthusiasm that remained. They soon decided to leave the islands for good. Point A, the most promising site, remains unexplored. A new group of divers is due to arrive in a few days. Maybe they'll be lucky and discover the secrets of Point A, where earlier teams had failed. A little over 900 people live near Solовецкий monastery. Almost no births happen here. There's still no maternity clinic on the island. To give birth, women have to go to the mainland. In 1967, the monastery, which had long since ceased to be a labor camp, became a museum. So in the 1970s, the government started looking across the whole Soviet Union for people willing to settle in the village of Silovki. Curiously enough, there are no sailors there. This area was a border zone until 1991, and no one could enter it without invitation. Now, as soon as summer comes and the weather is favorable enough for boat trips, the islands are crowded with tourists and pilgrims. Not even the excessive prices put them off. The history of this area outweighs everything else. No more than 30 monks live permanently in the monastery, and there are in total 75 on the islands. In the summer, it can appear that there are a lot more, because many priests also come here as pilgrims.
Here you go. I'll just put it up here. Okay, girls, how many do you want?
The village Kremlin is undergoing renovation. A titanium cross has been installed on top of the belfry. Domes are being covered with aspen wood, which is supposed to last 25 years. There are many arguments about how to restore the monastery. Which century should be reflected? It was rebuilt in the 19th century. But nobody is keen to replicate the look of the 15th or 17th centuries. The monastery's interior has been practically destroyed. When it hosted the labor camp, there were 3 or even 4-story bunk beds everywhere, even in the churches. All that remains of the old times in this cathedral is a fresco on the ceiling. Probably because it was too high to reach. There's also a special type of brick called Filipovsky. They're made much like bread, molded and placed into kilns by hand. There are 2 new sets of bells now. One is in the belfry and the other in the yard.
When these bells were brought here in 2008, a temporary belfry had to be built because it turned out that although it had been redecorated many times, its structure had never been repaired, so it simply could not sustain the weight of the bells. Now it's the lighter bells that ring, and the heavy ones are waiting for the lower part of the belfry to be restored. Then the bells will sound properly, because now the belfry is too low and the walls absorb the sound.
Marina is considered one of the best guides on the Solовецкие Islands. Only the luckiest of those who wish to visit sacred places are included in her group, especially when she leads the pilgrims to Golgotha. That's what people call Golgotha Cross Monastery on Anza Island. Even today, this island can only be reached in the summer. During winter, it's completely inaccessible. Nobody but monks live in secluded dwellings here. Tourists aren't even allowed to spend the night on the island. Marina tells them about the history of the place, the lives of the saints, and the miraculous appearances of the Virgin Mary, but not about the bells, only when they ask.
We know that the Anzer bells were simply dropped, although we don't know when it happened. During the times of the labor camp, several bells were used for sending signals. It was most likely monks who rolled them carefully down the hill to the lake. We know they're down there still, but the monks couldn't raise them from the bottom of the lake on their own.
The smaller bells of Anzer Island were found in the lake. But will the Solовецкие monastery bells also be discovered in the White Sea?
It's hard work. You have to search for days, years even, before you get any results. That's life. It's either done by sheer luck or hard grind.
Discoveries on the Соловецкие Islands are almost always a matter of luck.
When the landing strip at the airport was being expanded, the builders discovered these axe heads. They all came from Соловецкий monastery and have its seals. And in times of the labor camp, these ornamental axes were used as simple tools, wedges and hammers. Their heads and frames are broken, distorted, twisted, but they were all produced at the monastery. That's why this collection is so unique.
A new group of amateur divers has come to the islands for the weekend. They have no more than a few days to search for the bells. Unfortunately, the weather has turned. But the divers are far from discouraged. Despite the weather, they're determined to reach the lake bed and examine Point A. The most promising site, according to the expedition. They've devised a strategy.
We drop the buoy. First the divers go down. Let's set the course by compass. One pair goes north, another one south. And we meet here, with the ropes at full length. Right, this way we'll cover a vast area.
They encountered difficulties right from the beginning. The divers had to submerge during low tide, because according to the forecast, later the weather would get worse, hindering their work even more. They had to steer boats from the shore using oars.
Follow that course.
They eventually reach the spot and fix their coordinates. And then their problems begin. The boat's engine died, and while trying to restart it, the boats were carried away by the current, which seemed even stronger than before. It was hard to fix their position and deploy the marker buoy.
The wind here and the currents are strong. That's why the boat gets spun around and drifts away. This place is cursed.
The buoy that had been used to mark Point A when the weather was good suddenly comes to the surface, raising the expedition's hopes. But a second later, the current carries the boat away.
Let's go back.
Where? Back home?
Aren't we gonna dive?
All right, just once.
But that didn't work. They couldn't even drop the anchor.
Have we missed it? Where is it?
Already 190 meters away from us. The current drags us away.
We can't dive with the current so strong. The current is too strong.
If we dive, you'll have to go looking for us.
The weather is fine, but the current will drag us into the White Sea, and you'll have to go fetch us.
The archipelago is lashed with rain and winds for several days. The divers never had a chance to explore their chosen point. The White Sea, it seems, is determined to hold on to her secret just a little longer.
Is that enough? I can keep on ringing them if you want.